Chapter 221. Silas sensed the change before it came. It was a sort of intuition, but his mind remained focused. This world was entirely too unpredictable for him to relax. Stats were only one part of the equation. There was still skills, comprehensions, gene talents, and even treasures to take account of. This man had only just casually used a skill just now, or what felt like a skill adjacent, and yet he had been forced to use one of his trump cards to counter it. If he got serious, Silas might truly be finished. Even so, he only became more calm as the runes continued to flutter and flare out around him. Silas realized that this person likely had an ability not much different from his own enchanted scholar. Not only could this help him see through what he might do in advance, but it might also help him out in the future. Focused and unperturbed, Silas watched as Asriel's blade began to glow with a fierce light and the air shuddered. The blade seemed to multiply, illusory ghost forms of it separating from the main body and forming clones. When the man walked forward, the sword had already formed over a dozen shadows, each one looming with menace. Suddenly, they rushed towards Silas so quickly that it seemed like he couldn't react. The man moved at the same time, thrusting out. The sword was overlaid with a spiraling darkness that made it look more lance than sword. Everything came crashing down at once, and it was impossible for Silas to react to them all. He would either be skewered by the illusory swords or impaled by the lance sword. His green irises flashed as the ether around him continued to accumulate. However, Asriel's pupils couldn't help but constrict when it seemed that Silas wasn't going to make any attempt to dodge at all. Instead, it looked as though he was rushing toward the attacks like a moth to a flame, without a care for his life or pain at all. He took a hard step to the side, sweeping into the illusory blades, but it was clear that there was a hint of shock in Asriel's eyes nonetheless, and it was soon proven why. The illusory blades went right through Silas's body as though they weren't there at all, and he sidestepped out of the way of the coming lance. From the very beginning, he had already seen through the fact that there was nothing to worry about. The swords were nothing more than illusions in an attempt to get him to overextend himself or trade injury for survival. Unfortunately for Asriel, Silas had already seen through it the moment the runes took shape. The lance tore into the tree that had been right behind Silas, and Asriel felt that his wrist was shaken, and he couldn't help but be taken aback. What? The power of his strike should have been far more than this, so why did it feel like he had lost some edge? Less than voice of a king greater than. Asriel had no idea that when Silas activated less than king's shield greater than, he had already likewise activated the second of the two skills he had stored away. Voice of a king, FF plus skill. No law can bind the king. Limits. The basilisk king has none. It shatters them with its will alone. When facing an enemy of weaker will, you suppress them. Over the course of the battle, depending on the disparity, your stats increase, an extremely powerful skill that not only suppressed an enemy and weakened their stats, but increased yours as well. Why was Silas so focused on dodging and keeping his life? It was because he could feel less than voice of a king greater than working. The effect of Asriel's charisma was plummeting, and the speed of his blades was likewise only becoming easier and easier for Silas to track. Asriel's expression darkened. This time, he was truly enraged. How had such a skill been used on him without him even noticing? The only explanation was that the opponent's will was truly well beyond his own, but how could that be possible? Comprehension. It was the only explanation. But comprehensions alone were rare. Ones that could target mental stats were even rarer. Those that could impact will were almost all at least FFF. Just who was this Silas? Ether flared from Asriel's body, but for the first time in this battle, Silas used a skill of his own. He poured half the ether he had into less than astral bind greater than, freezing Asriel in place as he pulled out an enormous ballista. Asriel's expression changed, but it wasn't to one of shock, it was to disdain and derision. He finally couldn't hold back his inner thoughts at all. He let out a shout in a language that Silas couldn't understand at all, but he still memorized the syllables nonetheless. At that moment, a skill emanated from Asriel's body, layering into two and rising into the skies. All the shackles on him seemed to be shattered all at once as he cut down. It was too fast, far too fast. So fast that it became clear that Asriel had never taken any of this seriously from the very beginning, and likewise making it clear that he had given up on catching Silas alive. He just wanted him dead. There was no suspense. The blade cut through everything in its path, slicing the ballista in half and sundering everything behind it. Asriel exhaled an annoyed breath and made a move to sheath his sword as his eyes adjusted to the bright strike he had just levied. However, it was right then that all his hair stood on end. He barely had time to turn around and notice that Silas had appeared behind him at some unknown time, and a second ballista was already being fired. It was too late. He had just cast 2 skills at the same time, and his ether channels hadn't even had time to settle down yet. Shoo. Bang! The ballista bolt tore through his chest. This version maintains the original flow and details while addressing grammar and clarity issues for smoother readability. Chapter 222, complete. Silas exhaled a breath, and all at once, the surge of pain hit him in a wave. He swayed, and his body almost collapsed, but he bit his tongue hard. He pulled the ballista back into his madness key and rushed forward, storing Asriel's corpse away. He didn't have the time to waste here because he knew that the pig demons were almost certainly on their way to this location as well. Slinking away into the darkness, his gaze flashed with a green light. It wasn't yet time to return to safety and lick his wounds. The moment he felt that he had a decent enough recovery, he had to go back and attack the village as quickly as possible. He gave himself 3 hours at most. If others could read his thoughts, they would without a doubt think that Silas had completely lost his mind, but there was a very good reason he was making this decision. And greed wasn't anywhere near the top of the list. During their battle, that man had spoken a language he had simply never heard before. On a unified Earth, that was impossible. Everyone spoke a single language. There were only 2 potential explanations for this. The first was that this man was part of a secret society that purposely chose to speak a different language for the purpose of differentiating themselves and drawing a line with the rest of Earth. The second was that this man wasn't from Earth at all. The first possibility was so unlikely that Silas didn't even give it a 20% chance. But he knew that there was a system city near here, and he knew that there were hidden dangers lurking within them. Was it possible for those aliens to make their way into the ether plane already? Weren't they restricted by the system? These were all things that Silas didn't know the answers to. But what he did know was that that village was the most powerful he had ever seen, and not far away was the location of Wuxia's city. Anything those aliens were planning to do with the pig demons would directly impact him in the future. And they were also an unwanted variable considering the fact there was likewise another portal near here, and one that wouldn't be closing anytime soon. There would almost certainly be a battle between Lucius and the force on the other side of his portal. In that case, he had no choice but to eliminate a variable. If the system city was truly involved in this, something was telling him that it knew all of this. In that case, no matter what, he had to eliminate this threat right now. Silas escaped the range of the city, finding a sturdy and tall tree to perch himself in. Only then did he truly begin to gasp for breath. This had been too close. He thought that he had been cautious enough, but clearly not. Just when he had been planning to escape, something like this happened. However, there would only be more dangerous situations like this in the future. Even if he minimized them, it was impossible for him to eliminate them. In that case, he would just have to follow the Madness Key's advice. How could he help Earth survive this summoning? Be strong. He turned his attention away from the notifications flashing on the edge of his thoughts. Instead, the first thing he did was check Asriel's belongings. What he was hoping for was something that could help him to heal his injuries quickly. And after a few seconds, he wasn't disappointed. In fact, he found 3 of them. Healing Elixir, F+, consumable. A sweet nectar pulled from heavenly dew. Drink this and heal yourself. For every 20 points of constitution, boost healing capacity by plus 100%. Effects last a single day. Silas had seen a simple healing elixir before, but this one had thrown away the simple title. It had the same F+ grade as the one he had seen before, but the healing capacity was several times more potent. He had 140 constitution right now, meaning just one of these elixirs would give him a plus 700% boost to healing speed. Meaning, an injury that would normally take 2 months to heal would take just a single week after taking this elixir. Normally, healing broken ribs would take at least 6 weeks. The lacerations to his skin and flesh would take less than that. However, it also had to be noted that this was just for normal humans with a constitution of less than 10. Silas already had an elevated healing factor because his constitution was 14 times that of even the best humans before the summoning. It would take him less than a week to heal from his current injuries normally. That ultimately meant that with this healing elixir, it should only take him less than a day at most to be back to 100%. Though, he was only giving himself 3 hours. As far as Silas was concerned, this was enough. He didn't need to be at 100%. What he most wanted was for his soft tissue to recover. So long as his muscles could push at the normal level, he was confident in clearing out the rest of the village. As for pain, he could ignore that. Silas chugged one of the 3 healing elixirs and then put the rest away. Once he was finished, instead of looking through the rest of Azrael's belongings, he instead checked the notifications that he had been forcing himself to ignore. To his surprise. Quest, the flow of battle, silver, completed, clearance level, silver. Rewards. Greater than fusion crystal. Silas was surprised for a very good reason. Using an external item like the ballista wasn't something that he had thought would count. It felt a bit cheap. Maybe there was a threshold of some sort to meet, but it seemed that tricking experts to the death counted as well. However, now he was curious. What was a fusion crystal? Chapter 223, Fusion. What is a fusion crystal? Comprehensions require the body to be shaped and warped, only this way can it provide amplifications to one's stats. As such, it is extremely difficult to comprehend a second comprehension after having already mastered one, because it will often require altering and changing the first. In order to avoid this, one must use a fusion crystal, a magical item capable of allowing the fusion of a second comprehension. Feed a fusion crystal genes and it will help you to complete the process and maybe even give you a pleasant surprise. Silas smiled a bit bitterly. It seemed that this wasn't much of a reward at all. It was just a ticket to get him to do more work. It seemed he would have to gather up the genes he needed once again. Another hunt would begin. Let's see, then. He accepted the awards with his intention and soon a smooth crystal appeared in his hand. Instead of being a sphere like the other crystals he had seen, it was in the shape of an octahedron, reflecting all sorts of rainbow colors. Before Silas could even do anything, he felt a cool energy travel from the fusion crystal to his body. Comprehension detected, madness, FFF. Dormant comprehensions. Greater than boxing, F. Greater than taekwondo, F. Greater than Muay Thai, F. Greater than. The list was so long that Silas was taken aback. He thought that there was just one comprehension, but it actually turned out that there were so many. He immediately had several questions. These names were all familiar to him and were reflective of Earth's martial arts. Did these really exist across the universe? Or was it the case that the system adapted these comprehensions based on what he thought them to be? Second, these rankings. It didn't seem like they were giving an objective measure of how good these martial arts were. Rather, if he was a better boxer, maybe the boxing comprehension would have been F+ instead of F. The others were only F because his skill in them was even weaker. Of course, he was just guessing, but logically, there was no reason for boxing to be superior to any of the others. Other than the fact, of course, he used his fists the most frequently. And the third question, which should he choose? With how difficult it was to fuse just a second comprehension, he couldn't possibly choose casually, right? And if he was right about his second speculation, then didn't that mean that if he continued to work at it, he could make these comprehensions more powerful before fusing with them first? Silas focused on boxing and to his surprise there seemed to be more hidden menus. Boxing, F. Your hands are lethal weapons and their power induces fear. Sharp, fast, agile, and quick, they shatter bones and grind flesh to a pulp. Plus 5% constitution, plus 10% strength. Compared to madness, there was truly a world of difference. At fragmented mastery, madness could already give him plus 200% in stats, but boxing could only give him 15%. This was clearly a disparity in grade. It also felt incomplete. Was boxing really just about punching hard? However, there was actually more. Suppressed comprehensions. Boxing, F. Your hands are swift as flying daggers and streak through the air like shadows. Sharp, fast, agile, and quick, they hit the opponent when they least expect and retreat like the wind, plus 5% speed, plus 10% dexterity. Your hands are hidden weapons, ready and waiting, prepared to strike at any time. Your defense takes precedent, and you leave no holes to take advantage of. Airtight and leak-proof, plus 5% speed, plus 10% constitution. Scylla's gaze flickered. It seemed that there were other paths waiting in dormancy, but they were suppressed by his most powerful path. But to his shock, there was still yet more. Because when he focused on the list once again, he could almost feel parts of his body heating up as though he was clearly able to sense the exact type of flow of battle he was in when he sensed these particular comprehensions. He was shocked. Was this normal? After some thought, he realized it certainly wasn't. This feeling was similar to what he experienced when he used extricate to absorb genes rather than a natural ability of the fusion crystal. For most, they wouldn't feel anything at all. But for Scylla's, this sixth sense of sorts had been awakened because of his repetitive usage of extricate. He checked the comprehensions one after another and realized that it was indeed as he expected. Thanks to his increased sensitivity, he could feel exactly the state of these comprehensions without actually fusing with them. Comprehensions weren't just boosts to stats, but they were also a change to a state of mind. If he activated boxing in battle, it wouldn't be as simple as a 15% increase to his stats. Just like when he activated madness, it could affect everything from his telekinesis to even temporality, boosting the mastery of his stats. If he could sense these comprehensions more and more clearly, did he need to rush to fuse with one of them? He could even use the fusion crystal to track his progress, and maybe one day he could form another comprehension as powerful as madness. Is that possible? This fusion crystal should only be silver grade, so there's likely a limit on how powerful a comprehension it can fuse, right? It would be a shame if one day he had formed a suppressed comprehension too powerful for the fusion crystal to do anything about. If it worked anything like the gene crystal, then this was certainly a worry. After some hesitation, he felt that this was an important enough question to ask. Plus, he had more than enough common genes after a day of hunting anyway. That was when he learned that all fusion crystals above bronze had no such limits. Instead, they were limited by the number of fusions. Essentially, a silver crystal could only work if you had one comprehension and wanted to add one more. A golden crystal could help if you had two and wanted a third. Only a legendary crystal had no such limits, not to mention provided many more insight. But even then, the kind, type, and number of genes you would need to collect to ignore those limits would only grow with every additional comprehension. Chapter 224. After coming to understand all of these things, Scylla had also come to understand that the reward he had been given was no simple reward. Without such a fusion crystal, comprehending more than one comprehension was impossible, as far as he knew. If you were unlucky enough to have grasped a mediocre comprehension first, then you would truly be screwed. Though, maybe Scylla was thinking too much. Like Kasari had said, comprehensions were rare to the point she hadn't run into anyone with one. Scylla had come across a few he thought might have one, but he never got the chance to confirm one way or another. Even if he felt the way he completed this quest was less than satisfactory, he couldn't argue with the results. For now, he wouldn't use the crystal. His plan was to see how much he could improve his dormant comprehensions first before he took action. Plus, there was far more to gain from Azrael's body. He had mostly ignored them for the sake of getting to what he felt was most important, but nothing was holding him back now. There were a total of 6 more elixirs in Azrael's possession. 3 were ether replenishment elixirs and the other 3 were a type that Scylla had never heard of before, focus replenishment elixirs. It seemed that focus replenishment elixirs were designed to help the mind recover after grueling activity. The use that Scylla immediately thought of was his comprehension. He often found his mind being greatly fatigued after using his comprehension for an extended period of time, and that was even with maddened enlightenment, as a support skill. These seemed to be a shortcut. Focus replenishment, F+, consumable. A kiss of refreshing morning air. Drink this to help regain your mind's focus. For every 20 points of wisdom, boost mental recovery by 100%. Ether replenishment, F+, consumable. A helping hand from Mother Nature's fairies. Drink this to replenish your life's energy. For every 20 points of intelligence, recover 5 ether units per second. Lasts 5 seconds. Scylla put these away and stored them for when he would really need them. Though he knew that they could be useful to him now, he was also aware that any elixirs he took could add to the load on his body. It was ill-advised to take too many elixirs in quick succession. Judging by all of the descriptions, Silas could understand why. Each elixir scaled with your stats, so that meant it was relying just as much on your own body as it was on whatever mysterious herbs or spices made it up. Essentially, taking an elixir was like overdrafting on your own potential. He wasn't sure if there were truly miraculous elixirs out there that could give without taking first, but he was sure that he had yet to run into any of them just yet. So, he would just have to take his time and not take them for granted. They should only be used in emergency situations. After seeing that there was nothing interesting left in Asriel's spatial device aside from the device itself and some sets of clothing that seemed to have armor-like properties, Silas finally turned his attention to the dead man's sword. Since he couldn't use armor anyway, there was no point in looking at the rest unless he could actually sell them. Illusory Shadow Blade Common. Level, 17. Ability, Pierce, Duplicate, Evolve. Increase strength effectiveness by less than 8.5% for every less than 0.1 units of ether. Create less than 3 blade illusions for every less than 0.1 units of ether. Level up requirement, less than 8 common genes. Durability, 16/20. Silas' brows raised. Honestly, he had expected more out of this blade. But then again, if it was any more powerful than this, would he even still be breathing right now? Maybe he should be counting his lucky stars that it was this weak. Also, Silas' view of the world was a bit tinted. These sorts of evolution weapons weren't common. The far more common kind were like the wind javelin he had gotten, ones that had set, strict levels and couldn't evolve at all. Even so, the blade was more than a little disappointing. The blade illusions would only be useful a single time in battle. When your opponent realized they were fake, they'd just ignore them from then on. And if he met an opponent like himself, it might not even take a single slash for them to realize the problem. Unless, Silas' gaze flashed. Asriel wielded the sword in hand, so it was easy for Silas to always keep track of it. But if Silas even touched this blade, it would burn to ash. If he wanted to use it, he would have to use his telekinesis. And that might actually help him. So what if an opponent knew most of the shadows were fake if they lost track of the real blade in a sea of blades? That way, he could always keep them on their toes. It's a weak ability in the hands of most. But in mine, so long as I don't run into anyone who can see through it easily like I can, or someone with visualization abilities like mine that can always keep track of the sword no matter how it hides, then this could be a very useful battle tactic. Silas nodded to himself and then slotted the sword away. He would keep this in mind for the future and bring it out in an ideal situation. The last thing Silas found in Asriel's belongings was a badge. However, no matter how he turned it and flipped it, he couldn't see anything special about it. Still, he didn't dare to touch it. This badge seemed important. Wait. Silas' gaze flashed, and he changed his tactic, using his telekinesis to feel across the surface. As expected, he could feel the grooves that his eyes couldn't see in this darkness. Runes. These should be. I see, so this badge is some sort of key. But to what? Chapter 225 Leaderboards once more. Silas wasn't sure, but he stored it away after studying the runes. There was nothing more to gain from it for now, but what he did notice was that there was a very particular emblem on the badge. The badge itself was in the shape of a silver puck. It had some heft to it, and the engravings of the runes were small and around its circumference. Silas was sure that if he had just been looking at it normally, it would have been easy to ignore. That's because the emblem he mentioned was the centerpiece and would likely draw all of his attention. It was a horsetail whisk and a tome with a crystal embedded into the center of it. It was just a simple image, but it filled him with an unknown sense of awe that he couldn't quite place. It was either this key opened up a very miraculous place, or it was a secret to the identity of this Asriel character. Silas had a feeling that it was the latter, and after he tried to check Asriel's genes, he was even more certain. Error. No genes detected. Silas stared at this screen for a long while, his eyes narrowing. This was the first time he had seen such a thing. He had seen several types of gene screens before, from corrupt genes to normal genes. But this was a first. This was also an oddity that he couldn't ignore. It made Silas even more sure of his assertion. Could it really be that this man was from the System City? Was he the only one the System City had sent out? Or were there more of them? Silas took a breath and exhaled. He was unfortunate. He had been looking forward to looking at this man's genes, wondering if he would finally see his first silver gene or not. He had been salivating at the prospect of using extricate on it in the future once it had improved to the point that he could. But it seemed that opportunity had slipped through his fingers before he could even reach out to grab it. He really wanted to ask the Madness Key about this matter, but he knew with absolute certainty that this would definitely be a taboo question. If he couldn't even ask it about the spawned humans in villages, he certainly couldn't ask it about the system cities and those that ran them. But what did it mean for the genes to be inaccessible? Could the man have done something to his genes to come here? It shouldn't even be possible for there to be outside interference in this summoning, no. Then again, hadn't Silas broken the system's rules before? He quite literally had a title for doing just that, and it wasn't the first time either. Like that moment he lost 3 months of time miraculously was one of them, and it was still something he couldn't quite explain. It seemed that the situation of Earth was far, far worse than he knew. Silas shook his head and shrugged this matter off. He had already gained more than enough, and these matters were still too far beyond him. He had defeated this level 15 this time, but if there was a next time, what would he do in that case? In fact, when he went back to the pig demon village this time, he would have to be extra cautious in hopes that there wasn't a second level 15 lying in wait. Just as Silas was about to turn his attention away from Azrael completely, though, he suddenly remembered something. Oh. Coins. 64,223, F. Silas remembered something and checked his coin total, and he was truly floored. He knew that when he killed humanoid opponents, he would get coins out of it. When they were demons, he had to unearth their gene cores first. But when they were humans, he just directly took their funds by some mysterious method. When he remembered this, he thought to check his own coin total to see how much he had managed to gain from Azrael, and the result left him quite speechless. It seems that now I have no more excuses to not use the Bronze Nexus ticket. Not much time had passed at all, so Silas felt that he had the time he needed to check out the Nexus. Though, it would be a bit dangerous to do it here as his mind would be sucked into another world, he felt that it was still relatively safe. He pulled out his reward ticket and activated it. It floated before him, exuding a dim light before attaching itself to his forehead. Silas' gaze became a bit dim and soon he found himself, once again, in a world of foggy white. The world zoomed around him and soon he found himself in a city once again. He looked up and his eyes couldn't help but narrow. Leveling leaderboard, Astrid Grimblade. 1. Astrid Grimblade level 19. 2. Kale Darkman level 19. 3. Brack Smith level 19. 4. Hilda Silverden level 19. 5. Lucius Grimblade level 19. 6. Thorn Ravenclaw level 19. 7. Malachi Grimblade level 19. 8. Draven Ravenclaw level 18. 9. Asher Darkmane level 18. 10. Ragnar Ravenclaw level 18. The 10 names on the leaderboard were the exact same, but the changes were drastic, and the levels. Brack Smith, Hilda Silverden, they were both 9th and 10th place before, but now they've suddenly skyrocketed. And they're the only two that don't share those ancient family names. However, what Silas saw on the city leaderboard. City leaderboard. 1. Ironhold. 2. Darkfell. 3. Blackwing. 4. Duskfoot. 5. A Bonspire. 6. Stormcloud. 7. Eclipse Lock. 8. Nightfall. 9. Dusk Peak. 10. The Enclave. Unlike the previous list, this one had been completely overhauled. Of the original list, only the Enclave, which had once been third, remained. And Castlemaine was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 226 Scaling with Time. Silas couldn't help but wonder how it could be possible for their levels to increase so quickly, but soon he came to an understanding without the need for much deliberation. If the situation was anything like the Grimblades for the other families, then the trial was nothing more than a test by their families to see which of them would have the right to wield the best city stele. However, because of Silas, things came to an end earlier, and that was thrown to the wayside. That wasn't what was important here, but rather it was the difference between the support they could receive inside the trial versus now. In the trial, they were randomly teleported across the ether plane and had no one but themselves to rely upon. But now, they had the support of their entire families and had obviously already brought their factions together. Whether it was their ability to collect resources, scale their actions, or gather genes, it was all now on another level. Silas wasn't just competing with individuals any longer. He was competing with entire organizations. It took them 3 months to reach level 9. Now, it had barely been a month since the trial ended, and they had already more than doubled their levels. If this worked anything like a video game did, that progress should also be exponentially more difficult at that. And yet, they had still managed to do it. The pressure Silas was feeling couldn't help but increase. However, in the end, his gaze became focused. It was only more important now for him to take risks, then. He wanted to see how far he could push level 0 before he was inevitably forced to take the next step. But now that things had come to this, he also realized that if he could help it, it would likely be best not to be stubborn. In all this time, he had yet to even lay eyes on a silver gene, let alone find a method of actually absorbing one. With how difficult it was to get a leg up on a level 15 just now, if he was too obstinate, the destiny quest hanging over his head right now would become entirely unmanageable very soon. I'll need to set a limit of some sort for myself. I can't allow this level 0 cap to hold me back for too long. If I can't make enough progress, or I'm grinding my wheels, I'll have to take that step. But for now. His gaze flashed and he turned his attention away from the leaderboards, moving toward the shop. However, that was when something unexpected happened. Would you like to register your comprehension? Silas' eyes narrowed. Register his comprehension. Why? Registering your comprehension will allow your name to appear on the comprehension rankings. Once 10 names are noted, the ranking will be made public. Silas frowned. Why would he want to do that? Rankings provide a set number of coin rewards that scale with time, a system that began the moment the trial ended. First place 1,000 coins a day, second place 900 coins a day, third place 800 coins a day, fourth place 500 coins a day, fifth place 400 coins a day, sixth place 300 coins a day, seventh place 150 coins a day, eighth place 100 coins a day, ninth place 50 coins a day, 10th place 25 coins a day. Reward total will multiply by a factor of 2 next month, time to next reward increase, 2 days. Silas was taken aback by this. But wait, doesn't that mean there are less than 10 people on Earth who have comprehensions? Or is it just that less than 10 people are willing to appear? Or maybe that less than 10 people have had the opportunity to do this? Silas shook his head. No, it can't be that less than 10 have had the opportunity. Just the number of Grimblades, Ravenclaws, and Darkmanes should be enough to fill out this quota. In that case, there are only 2 possibilities. Either comprehensions are even weaker than I thought they were, or even the likes of the Grimblades and their rivals don't dare to reveal their comprehensions so easily. Silas lost himself in thought. If it was the first, he might take such a risk. It had taken him a lot of effort to accumulate the over 60 KF coins he had. But according to this, in 2 days, if he happened to be first place, then he could accumulate that in a month without having to do anything at all. But, if it was the latter, then he would be serving himself up. Of course, even if it was the first, it came with a risk as well. His name would show up as Silas Grimblade, so others might feel that it was even more necessary to target him, and he might receive unwarranted attention from the Grimblades as well, making moving around all the more difficult. Silas took a breath. He needed more information to make such a decision. For one, it would be better if he found out just how useful being a tycoon could be. So, for now, he ignored the question and continued into the shop, beginning to look through an array of items. The first thing he noticed was that the selection in the Bronze Nexus was far better than what he had seen with Castlemaine. There were a larger array of items, and the list seemed endless. He couldn't make heads or tails of it in a short time, and he was beginning to wonder if he had given himself enough time. Time left, 0 hours 59 minutes and 13 seconds. It seemed that one way or another, he was going to have to hurry it up. So, he arranged a list of priorities and started from the top. What did he need the most right now? Well, there were 2 things. The first was a method of breaking his gene and stat limits. The second was a method of improving his dormant comprehensions. Silas didn't think that he'd find a method to do the first, but he was surprised in the end. Silas couldn't help but wonder how it could be possible for their levels to increase so quickly, but soon he came to an understanding without the need for much deliberation. If the situation was anything like the Grimblades for the other families, then the trial was nothing more than a test by their families to see which of them would have the right to wield the best city stele. However, because of Silas, things came to an end earlier, and that was thrown to the wayside. That wasn't what was important here, but rather it was the difference between the support they could receive inside the trial versus now. In the trial, they were randomly teleported across the ether plane and had no one but themselves to rely upon. But now, they had the support of their entire families and had obviously already brought their factions together. Whether it was their ability to collect resources, scale their actions, or gather genes, it was all now on another level. Silas wasn't just competing with individuals any longer. He was competing with entire organizations. It took them 3 months to reach level 9. Now, it had barely been a month since the trial ended, and they had already more than doubled their levels. If this worked anything like a video game did, that progress should also be exponentially more difficult at that. And yet, they had still managed to do it. The pressure Silas was feeling couldn't help but increase. However, in the end, his gaze became focused. It was only more important now for him to take risks, then. He wanted to see how far he could push level 0 before he was inevitably forced to take the next step. But now that things had come to this, he also realized that if he could help it, it would likely be best not to be stubborn. In all this time, he had yet to even lay eyes on a silver gene, let alone find a method of actually absorbing one. With how difficult it was to get a leg up on a level 15 just now, if he was too obstinate, the destiny quest hanging over his head right now would become entirely unmanageable very soon. I'll need to set a limit of some sort for myself. I can't allow this level 0 cap to hold me back for too long. If I can't make enough progress, or I'm grinding my wheels, I'll have to take that step. But for now. His gaze flashed and he turned his attention away from the leaderboards, moving toward the shop. However, that was when something unexpected happened. Would you like to register your comprehension? Silas' eyes narrowed. Register his comprehension. Why? Registering your comprehension will allow your name to appear on the comprehension rankings. Once 10 names are noted, the ranking will be made public. Silas frowned. Why would he want to do that? Rankings provide a set number of coin rewards that scale with time, a system that began the moment the trial ended. First place 1,000 coins a day, second place 900 coins a day, third place 800 coins a day, fourth place 500 coins a day, fifth place 400 coins a day, sixth place 300 coins a day, seventh place 150 coins a day, 8th place 100 coins a day, 9th place 50 coins a day, 10th place 25 coins a day. Reward total will multiply by a factor of 2 next month. Time to next reward increase, 2 days. Silas was taken aback by this. But wait, doesn't that mean there are less than 10 people on Earth who have comprehensions? Or is it just that less than 10 people are willing to appear? Or maybe that less than 10 people have had the opportunity to do this? Silas shook his head. No, it can't be that less than 10 have had the opportunity. Just the number of Grimblades, Ravenclaws, and Darkmanes should be enough to fill out this quota. In that case, there are only 2 possibilities. Either comprehensions are even weaker than I thought they were, or even the likes of the Grimblades and their rivals don't dare to reveal their comprehensions so easily. Silas lost himself in thought. If it was the first, he might take such a risk. It had taken him a lot of effort to accumulate the over 60 KF coins he had. But according to this, in 2 days, if he happened to be first place, then he could accumulate that in a month without having to do anything at all. But, if it was the latter, then he would be serving himself up. Of course, even if it was the first, it came with a risk as well. His name would show up as Silas Grimblade, so others might feel that it was even more necessary to target him, and he might receive unwarranted attention from the Grimblades as well, making moving around all the more difficult. Silas took a breath. He needed more information to make such a decision. For one, it would be better if he found out just how useful being a tycoon could be. So, for now, he ignored the question and continued into the shop, beginning to look through an array of items. The first thing he noticed was that the selection in the Bronze Nexus was far better than what he had seen with Castlemaine. There were a larger array of items, and the list seemed endless. he couldn't make heads or tails of it in a short time, and he was beginning to wonder if he had given himself enough time. Time left, 0 hours 59 minutes and 13 seconds. It seemed that one way or another, he was going to have to hurry it up. So, he arranged a list of priorities and started from the top. What did he need the most right now? Well, there were two things. The first was a method of breaking his gene and stat limits. The second was a method of improving his dormant comprehensions. Silas didn't think that he'd find a method to do the first, but he was surprised in the end. Chapter 227 Runes. Unfortunately, that excitement didn't last very long. Bronze Gene Crystal, F, Treasure, one's genetic code is a universe within the universe. Endless and vast, the number of meandering paths it can take are uncountable. Use this bronze gene crystal and begin to forge your own path. Capacity, 51, cost, 100,000, F, coins. This put two things into perspective for Silas. For one, gene crystals were shockingly valuable. He had only received his first out of a ridiculous dungeon with 100 physical requirement and a level cap of 0. And he received his second out of a slot machine for the end of the grueling trial. It had to be remembered that even the best athletes on Earth would have a cap at 30 or so at level 0. Only those in the Grimblades and families of the like would have a cap at and over 50. But even then, it was hard to say if they had a stat limit that high at level 0. Now, this Nexus was trying to sell him the weakest of bronze gene crystals for almost double the money that he had. Even the one he had been disappointed in had a capacity of 70. But this one was 19 worse than that and couldn't possibly increase his current limit. Silas shook his head. He would be better off finding power dungeons to clear and hope that one of them dropped one. When Silas had this thought, his gaze flashed again. Couldn't he buy dungeon maps? He had once gotten a dungeon map from Zurog, the head of Knoll Village 019. If it could be dropped, maybe buying one wasn't impossible. Considering the danger involved, maybe they would be cheaper as well. However, when Silas pulled up the menu, what he saw was disappointing. There were no descriptions, just a list of them demarcated by price and price alone. The cheapest were only a few hundred coins, and the most expensive was several tens of thousands. The highest priced one was 40,500 F coins. However, as Silas had said, there was nothing else to differentiate them. Presumably, the more expensive ones were also more valuable, but there was nothing else to go off of. He didn't even know if they were near him or not. For all he knew, they were months of journeying from his current location. Silas shook his head. He had no reference for how valuable dungeon maps were, so he had no way of knowing if the price was even worth it. If the 40,500 was a highly rated dungeon that also happened to be within his capacity to handle, he would leap at the chance. But from this, he couldn't even tell if it was a level 0 dungeon or a level 100 dungeon. It wasn't worth it. Seeing that his path toward increasing his gene and stat limits wasn't doing so well, Silas changed gears again. This time, he focused instead on trying to find a method of solidifying his comprehensions further. Maybe another title quest, or maybe a skill of some sort. Silas racked his brains, trying to think outside of the box. Sometimes the most useful things he found existed in places he didn't expect. This Nexus had a wider array of titles quests to choose from, but none of them were impressive, especially not in comparison to Silas' own. Silas remembered that he could also use titles themselves to forcefully increase his limits at the price of pain, but there was nothing here that caught his interest. There were many titles that gave +1 bonuses, but they weren't worth the price. The best one he found was for a +5 boost to Constitution, but it was a masochistic method that required self-mutilation. This wasn't an exaggeration at all. The title was known as Sacrificial Lamb. Silas couldn't see the exact details, but judging by the introduction, he would likely need to carve himself up like some sort of sick self-cannibalism. The more he looked, the less likely it seemed that he would be able to find anything that he actually needed. Time continued to tick away, and Silas couldn't help but frown. Alright, let's switch gears again, then. I need to find a skill that helps me to maximize Enchanted Scholar. That level 15 seemed to have a similar ability and was able to use runes to directly attack. Maybe I can find something similar. Once again, Silas ran into a brick wall. There was no skill of the sort, and he realized soon after that he was probably looking in the wrong place. Skills were abilities that activated naturally with ether. It circulated on its own. It didn't need the support of telekinesis or things of the like, so what he needed probably wouldn't be found in such a straightforward manner. Silas took a breath and settled his mind. This world was so large, it was inevitable that the ideas he had for things would be unlikely to go smoothly. Panicking or wasting time being frustrated would only end up doing more harm than good. Let's take a more roundabout approach, then. By the time Silas found what he was looking for, he already had less than 30 minutes left on his timer. And as per usual, he found it in a location he least expected it. What he needed was actually found in a profession shop, something that hadn't been open to him before. But it seemed that now that he had a profession, the system registered him as a person of this path. In fact, it also asked him if he would like to be listed on the profession leaderboard as well, something he likewise directly ignored. Introduction to Rune, Rune Patterns, and Rune Geometry, Secrets, Limited Access. Rune Sight must be awakened, cost, 15,000 F coins. World of Runes, Secrets, Limited Access. Rune Visualization must be awakened, cost, 30,000 F coins. Ether, Runes, and the Mind, Secrets, Limited Access. Rune Enlightenment must be awakened, cost, 100,000 F coins. Chapter 228 Clue. Silas' eyes shone with a bright light when he saw these three listings. He was also taken aback by the secrets tag on them. It was the first time he had seen such a thing. In the end, he chose to exchange for Introduction to Runes, Rune Patterns and Rune Geometry. Although he could afford to exchange for World of Runes as well, he still wasn't sure if there was anything else he wanted to buy, and he also felt that though he was eager for improvement, biting off more than he could chew wasn't worthwhile. Part of maximizing wealth was about not allowing it to sit idly. Silas wasn't much of an economics major, but his parents ran a business, so he had soaked up a few things with his own almost obsessive attention to detail. The 30,000 coins he saved now by not exchanging for World of Runes just yet would help him to better maximize his funds. Otherwise, who knew how long it would take him to finish going through the introduction? If it took months, then he would have wasted that 30,000 coins for nothing. Still, Silas was satisfied with this purchase. This would teach him a lot about using his new gene talent. What he didn't expect was that the moment he exchanged for it, the small booklet would vanish into motes of light that surged into his body. It was directly imprinted into his mind, and when he tried to pull out the information, it was like he was staring at a long road of locked doors. That was when Silas understood. It's like an online course. Whenever I want to practice, I can call it up in my mind and it will take me to this world. No wonder it's so expensive. After checking out a ton of items, Silas found that most things in the Bronze Nexus were 2,000 to 3,000 coins at most, with the vast majority being a few hundred. Items that were more expensive than that were only in the top few percentile and not even all that easy to find. It felt like part of the challenge of using the Nexus was actually finding all the items you wanted first. Having come to this conclusion, Silas changed gears. He looked through the rest of what he could find in the professions, trying to see if he could maybe find something about telekinesis. He had been entirely self-taught until now, and it would be nice if he could find something about it. But in the end, there was nothing. I should have expected this, honestly. It seems that my telekinesis only awakened thanks to madness, which is an FFF comprehension. Things related to it are unlikely to appear in a Bronze Nexus. Still, Silas decided to give himself 5 more minutes of looking, and this time, he found something unexpected. In an offshoot section of the professions shop, there was the living resource section. It sold things like beast pelts, bone, blood, and even bone, presumably to be used in conjunction with a profession of some kind. That was when Silas remembered that Kassarai had been quite eager to gain full beast pelts because of Maya Sinclair, an FF plus seamstress that she had managed to exchange for. It seemed that it was possible to exchange for such things in the Nexus as well, though it was very expensive. Silas saw a few level 10 beast pelts from rare, hard-to-find creatures being sold for over 5 figures. However, what caught Silas' attention wasn't this at all. Level 8 Arctic King Cobra Venom Pouch, Living Resource. The Arctic King Cobra is a vicious beast with venom that runs so hot it can no longer be classified as a cold-blooded beast. Forced to migrate because it could no longer stand the heat, it now exists near the tundra line, looming like an almighty overlord. This venom will both burn and corrode you. Handle with caution. It has long surpassed the realm of normal venom and has become an ether type of its own, entering the realm of Mansa. However, when used well, even those level 10s with awakened classes will have to run in fear. Cost, 6000 F coins. Silas stared at this description for a long while, his mind churning. Maybe it was a leap, but when he read this description, he couldn't help but remember the bouncer he had fought and the poison he had used in his attack. Then he recalled the destiny quest he had and about how he had to defeat a Mansa creature. Every time he had come across poison uses, there seemed to always be a reason for it. Like when he fought against the gnolls. The reason they had poison-tipped arrows was because their village head had the dungeon map. They had gone to try and clear the zones, only to run into the spitting cobras. That was where they had gotten their paralysis poison from. Would it be that much of a surprise if the bouncer had gotten his poison through similar means? It also made perfect sense because the description mentioned the tundra, and his current location on the ether plane was precisely near this location. In that case, the Mansa creature that he was looking for was actually nearby. In addition, it was a serpentous creature as well, which would make the load far easier on him. Silas made a mental note of this. When he got the chance, he would see if he could find these Arctic spitting cobras and take down the fragmented quest. Maybe if he was lucky, the chain quest would allow him to take more advantage of these spitting cobras. As for whether he wanted to follow this path of Mansi, he didn't really care very much. If anything, using poison would only help him bridge the gap. Not only would it help immunize him, but he would be able to take down enemies far stronger than himself very soon. Chapter 229 Psychedelic. Still, Silas didn't get ahead of himself. The fragmented requirement for the quest was already to defeat a level 10. Who knew how much worse it would get from here on out? If he was correct, this was just the beginning. In the future, he would probably have to face off against not only powerful beasts, but also complete side quests and other requirements as well. It was doubtful that he would just need to defeat a beast and call it a day, though he hoped that would be the case. As such, he felt that he should take the easy way out when he could and consider other things later. All things considered, poison wasn't a bad path for him, especially since it would synergize well with his Vipermancer profession, at least in part. Plus, poison was useful for many other things as well. It might be even more helpful in battling against those of a higher level than himself thanks to its control and area of effect applications. Silas slotted this matter into the back of his mind and continued looking around. Now, it was best to focus on what was in front of him, especially since there was only so much time remaining. By this point, he had less than 20 minutes left, yet still almost 40,000 coins to spend. After some thought, he chose to abandon thoughts of everything else and just go to the skill shop. Right now, he was already feeling that his skills were a bit too lackluster. Let's arrange by skills that can synergize with madness. That way I can get a huge boost in mastery without having to do much. Having a skill was one matter. But if its mastery was too low, it wouldn't be worth it. If mastery was low, casting time would take a while. This was why that government official that Silas took the stabilizing bracelet from needed to load less than Shadow Warprather than using it freely in battle. Ultimately, the bracelet only had 3 slots, and Silas also needed to worry about its durability. It was best if he used it as infrequently as possible. That said, grade was obviously of great importance. For example, he had only mastered less than King's Shield Toe Bronze, but it already had triple the defenses of his legendary mastery less than Solidify greater than. Unfortunately, there were no FF plus skills in this directory. Still, there were a few FF skills that met Silas' requirements. And the expenses weren't so bad, the most expensive still being less than 5 figures. Mirror Step, FF, skill. Elusive and hard to grasp, you move like the fleeting clouds and your actions are a mystery to all but yourself. Create less than 1 mirror image of yourself for 1 ether unit. Cost, 4500 F coins. It looked like an interesting skill, especially when he thought about the blade. But its description was too vague. What happened to the mirror images after he formed them? Would he have to control them independently? Would that take up more of his wisdom? Or, I see, mirror image, they're just going to do what I do. That's less useful. Silas thought about it. The cost was high, an ether unit for just a single image. But it was also just reflective of the fragmented mastery, after all. He set the skill aside for now and moved on to the next. Stunning Spike, FF, skill. Your mind is sharper than others, so much so that you strip them of even their own ability to think and reflect clearly. Cost is 10 units of ether in exchange for 1 second of confusion. For every 10% gap in will, cost will decrease by 1 unit, with the lowest cost being 0.1 ether units. Cost, 9500, F coins. Silas didn't hesitate this time, buying up the skill instantly. And as expected. Your understanding of Less Than Stunning Spikers deepened. Less Than Stunning Spikers reached Silver Mastery. Though it wasn't an immediate leap to Legendary, Silas assumed that this was because there was quite a big gap between F+ skills and FF skills. So long as he raised Madness up to Silver Mastery, Less Than Stunning Spike would certainly follow. This should also be the reason why Less Than King's Shield was still only at Bronze Mastery, because it was FF+. Even so, the results were good. Stunning Spike, FF, skill. Your mind is sharper than others, so much so that you strip them of even their own ability to think and reflect clearly. Cost is 7 units of ether in exchange for 1 second of confusion. For every 10% gap in will, cost will decrease by 1 unit, with the lowest cost being 0.1 ether units. Silas checked his remaining coin total. Coins, 39,723, F. He had spent quite a bit. It seemed that he still had far more money to churn through. In that case, he would buy up the things that interested him. He didn't know the next time he would get a Nexus ticket, and money left behind here would end up being just as useless as buying something useless. So he might as well take a gamble. He bought the Mirror Step skill and 2 others. Astral Will Fission, FF, skill. Your mind is more flexible than others can fathom. Using your strong will and a calm state, you can project your mind into the far-off distance, undetectable to all but those with a stronger will than your own. Form Astral Will by severing some of your will stat. Warning, the more of your will you sever, the more drastic the consequences should your astral will be shattered. For every 100 will severed, 5 ether units to complete Astral Will Fission. For every 100 will severed, gain 1 minute of travel time. Otherwise, use 5 more ether units. Within 100 meters, there will be no additional cost of ether. For every 10 meters beyond, there will be an additional 0.1 ether units of cost for every 10 seconds the astral will is maintained. Cost, 9500, F coins. This skill was one that Silas would have likely bought whether he was trying to spend money or not. It felt far too useful if he found the right situation. In addition, after his madness got its hands on it. Your understanding of Less Than Astral Will Fissioners deepened. Less Than Astral Will Fissioners reached Silver Mastery. Astral Will Fission, FF, skill. For every 100 will stat severed, 2 ether units to complete Astral Will Fission. For every 100 will severed, gain 2 minutes of travel time. Otherwise, use 2 more ether units. Within 100 meters, there will be no additional cost of ether. For every 20 meters beyond, there will be an additional 0.1 ether units of cost for every 20 seconds the astral will is maintained. This skill would be endlessly useful in scouting out regions ahead of time, and if he had had it earlier, he might not have suffered so much at the hands of Azrael. Though, it also required a lot of risk assessment. An astral will formed by just 100 will would be easy to detect by any somewhat powerful person. But if he used more will than that to hide it better, then should it ever be found, the backlash would be several times worse. He would have to choose very carefully. Then, there was the last skill. This one wasn't in line with his madness, at least not entirely, but he felt that it was about time he had a true attacking skill. Psychedelic Punch, FF, skill. Chapter 230 Heroes. Psychedelic Punch, FF, skill. Your fists are as mysterious as your mind. They disorient the senses and are shrouded in their own legend. Cost is 1 ether unit per use. Requires a visualized conception to be used. Cost, 4,000 F coins. What Silas found interesting was that this skill was probably the cheapest of the FF skills available, but its description was intriguing. This visualized conception was something he had never heard of, so he asked the Madness Key about it and got quite a vague answer. What is a visualized conception? An abstract concept that can only be grasped by those with the firmest of wills and sharpest of minds. It is a method of projecting a visualization of the mind into the outside world and using it to influence the minds and states of being of others. When used to attack, it will not only gather more ether than usual, but it can also lead to a lag in response by an opponent. What fascinated Silas the most about this skill was that it didn't seem to have an obvious limit. The cost was 1 ether unit no matter what, and it didn't seem to scale. Everything hinged on this visualized conception that was mentioned, and after learning what it was, Silas had a very good idea about what to use. In fact, it could be said that he already had one. Still, it seemed that he would have to wait until he tested out this attack first before he understood how powerful it was. In the end, Silas was still left with over 21,000 coins, so he decided to take a look at the treasure section. It hadn't been his first choice to check out because there were simply too few he could use. Right now, he could split his mind 6 ways, and he still needed to reserve one for the control of his actual body. Plus, he had also gotten into the habit of keeping one in reserve just in case he needed to suddenly take something out of his Madness Key. That meant that he could control 4 things at once now, and usually 3 of those were occupied by his kunai. However, when he remembered how the ballista had saved his life, he realized that maybe there was more to using treasures like this than he thought. Silas had several advantages that most others didn't. For one, his storage device was far larger than most, so he could afford to carry around such heavy artillery. Second, his telekinesis gave him flexibility in deploying these weapons from afar and from differing positions, whereas someone else would have to personally control and aim the ballista themselves. Third, his visualization made his aim very accurate in comparison to others. At least within 20 meters, missing was almost entirely impossible. The enemy would have to force him to miss by evasion or something of the sort, but even then it would be difficult for most. Fourth, his Madness Key seemed to work differently from other spatial devices. He could put things inside as long as they were within range of his telekinesis, and he could also deploy them in the same fashion. Though, the further the distance, the more lag there was. Silas hadn't realized this fact until recently, and it happened to enlighten him the moment he was in a heated battle with Azrael. This all made it so if Silas wanted to be a one-man artillery unit, he was probably uniquely suited to do so. So, when he entered the treasure store, the first thing Silas looked for were large artillery units. But what he didn't expect was for his eyes to begin to water at the prices almost instantly. It seemed that most of these treasures were specifically designed for cities, so while the highest prices he had seen until now were only 100,000, it wasn't long before he saw prices double and even triple that. Interesting. It seems that the grade of an item is subjective to the kind of item it is. A pistol, for example, will always be less expensive than a mounted machine gun even if they are of the same exact grade. It could be said that until now, Silas was only looking at pistols, but now he was looking at machine guns. Even if they were both under the purview of a bronze-rated nexus, the prices of the two obviously couldn't be the same. There weren't just weapons like this, there were also large city-protecting formations that were very similar to the one that Kasari had used to hold on until his arrival, and there were also city buffs and things of the like. In the past, Silas had thought Kasari was rich, but seeing how expensive it was to buy city-related things, he certainly couldn't say that anymore. Plus, there was the fact that the incentive structure for ranking so high on the leaderboard didn't appear until after the trial. So she didn't even reap any rewards for being number 1, and now she was entirely off the list. In the end, Silas could only lower his standards and start looking at items worth 20,000 coins at most. But as one might expect, they were mostly disappointing until he landed on one item. Hero's Heart Shield, FF. Level, 10. Ability, Bulwark, Final Stand, Restore. Form a hero heart with your best warrior, use their will to amplify the defenses of your troops. For every 100 points of will, amplify constitution of up to 20 warriors by 10%. Slam the shield into the ground, and in exchange for 1 unit of ether, create a shockwave that deflects 400 points of damage. Durability, 100 and 100. Cost, 20,000 F coins. Scylla's eyes lit up when he saw this shield. He had taken Brant's shield, hoping to use it, but he hadn't been able to. This shield, however, would fix the one glaring weakness that was holding him back. Chapter 231 Totem. Scylla's exchanged for the shield and didn't look back. The problem he faced with trying to use Brant's shield was the same reason he couldn't use his telekinesis to fly through the skies. It was a matter of power output. The shield was light enough for him to control with his telekinesis, but if he was fighting against someone and they dealt a heavy blow against it, its weight would multiply several times over in that brief instant, causing him to suffer. Even if he tried just controlling the shield to parry, the issue would remain the same. He would still need to exert some power to be able to do that. But this shield, there was a shockwave. That meant that the attack and the shield didn't need to actually collide with one another. In addition, its effect was double that of less than solidify greater than, and though weaker than less than King's shield greater than, that was a skill he could only use when fused with the Basilisk King anyway. In addition, this was just the first benefit. This shield was so expensive not because of this ability but rather its ability to bolster constitution. If he had this shield deployed, his constitution would be increased by 30%, from its current 140 to 182. With the scorned wraps, at least on his fist, he would be able to exert 200 points of constitution. This was huge and it wasn't something he could look down on. This was only a level 10 FF treasure, so it would almost certainly have some limit at some point. But for now, this was huge. Although he was wasting a lot of this treasure's potential, he didn't care. The first thing Scylla saw when he opened his eyes again was the shield. It was a tall wooden tower shield with an outline of bolted steel across its edges. Right in the center of it, there was a faint painting of a blazing sun that seemed to be peeling away. Heavy. That was the first thought Scylla's had. The shield was at least 50 pounds. Luckily, the capacity of his telekinesis had increased. Even with an item this heavy, he could still exert at least 90% of his telekinesis physical capacity without issue. Scylla took a breath and put the shield away after testing it out. It could indeed increase his constitution, but he had to activate basic etherflow first, only that way could he link the abilities of his shield to himself without actually touching it. Not a bad trade-off. I can use basic etherflow for a much longer period in battle now anyway. Once he was finished with this, Scylla began to familiarize himself with his new skills. After upgrading to Silver Mastery beneath the Strength Madness, less than Mirror Step was able to form 5 mirror images from a single unit of ether. Less than Stunning Spike was interesting because it seemed to be a skill that could miss if he wasn't careful. At the very least, while it was invisible to his eyes, the spike formed from his will was clearly visible in his visualization. If he met an enemy that was ready for it, it would be difficult to hit them. Less than Astral Will Fission was. More painful than he thought it would be. It wasn't quite as bad as one might think splitting a soul might be, but it was instead more existential. When he activated it, it felt like he was staring into an abyss of death that he could never pull himself out of. It was an assault on his mind unlike anything he had experienced before. But interestingly enough, Scylla actually found his will being tempered by it. If not for the fact his will genes were far from being in a state of wealth, he might have actually seen some increase. The actual experience of having already formed an astral will, though, was very interesting. It was like he had gained another pair of eyes that funneled information to his mind, like his thoughts had a split screen in them and he could easily experience two things at once. After some deliberation, Scylla decided to dismiss his first 100 will astral will and form a 200 will one instead. He felt that the number of people with 200 will was very few, and forming a 300 will one would be far too much considering he only had 319 will right now. Then, he sent this invisible astral will to scout out the situation in the village. Only then did he turn his attention to less than psychedelic punch greater than. The reason Scylla was so confident in this skill was because he felt he already had a visualized conception. His Serpentis Beast totem. What was that if not a visualized conception? Its appearance alone could cause the stats of Serpentis Beasts to plummet, and those Serpentis Beasts on his side to gain a boost to their strength. So when Scylla saw this, he immediately thought of if he could use it with this skill. He decided to test it out as he waited for feedback from his astral will. Hopping down from the tree, he walked in the direction of his astral will to keep the distance close enough that his ether consumption wasn't so great. He took a breath, visualized his beast totem, and then punched out. At that moment, the world turned silent. A pair of golden, slit eyes appeared behind Silas and the glow on his fist shifted. Silas felt his heart shake before the punch was even sent out. His body shook and the air quaked. Bang! The muscles in Silas' arm threatened to tear apart as a violent fist imprint surged out. The air pressure rushed out and slammed against a tree. Though it dispersed, the sound was akin to a solid tock, almost as though a sledgehammer had just rammed against its body. Silas came to a stop, his gaze flickering. Less than psychedelic punch made no promises about exactly how powerful it would be, presumably because this would all be dependent on how good your visualized conception was, at least up to a certain point. But just now, he felt like this punch carried at least 300 points of strength, more than double his current strength. This should have been entirely impossible for a mere FF skill. Chapter 232 Return. Silas took a breath and exhaled. Despite the power of the punch, he realized several issues immediately. For one, his arm was throbbing as though he had just put it through a rigorous workout. He was certain that if he punched out with this same arm again, there would certainly be problems. The second issue was that far more of his ether was used up than what the technique denoted. It said that it should have cost just 1 ether unit, and yet he had used up as much as 5 just now, and it even felt like the technique wanted to take more, but he was just unable to sustain it. However, Silas had a feeling that even if he could give the technique more, he certainly shouldn't do it. That's because his body definitely couldn't withstand it. It didn't seem to be a matter of constitution as the damage came from his ether channels themselves. His constitution alone couldn't seem to protect it. While increasing his constitution would save the aching in his arm a bit, if he ignored everything else and continuously used this technique, he would likely rip his ether channels apart, and then he wouldn't even be able to use skills anymore. Silas shook his head. It seemed that there was a price to pay for having such a good visualized conception. In all likelihood, if this less than psychedelic punk skill had been F instead of FF, then maybe it could withstand the brunt of his visualized conception. But ultimately, the skill was too poor in quality to withstand the full extent of his beast totem. I'll have to save it as a trump card for now, and maybe find a new visualized conception that can be used with it when I'm not bringing out so much power. As Silas was lost in thought, he found that he had already once again entered a 100-meter range of the village, and the feedback his astral was giving him was quite substantial. As expected, even when he barely tried to hide him, no one detected him, and that was despite the pig demon village being on high alert after the last attack. Their wills were too inferior to sense him. However, as Silas explored the village more and more, his expression couldn't help but become solemn. The waters were, indeed, deep. While there were no other level 15s just hiding around, this village had a full militia of 50, of which the worst were level 8 and the best were level 10. In addition to this, they had a level 12 village head leading the charge. Silas checked each and every one of their levels with ease, and it was shocking to say the least. If he was careless in his approach, he would end up suffering again. But there was also good news. There were 2 weak points, both of which happened to come from the very same 2 outposts that he had attacked. One was still missing an outpost that had yet to be rebuilt, while the second was missing a ballista. The pig demons compensated for this with more warriors in these regions, but because of this, the other outposts were more scarcely populated. There are about 20 militiamen patrolling the walls alone. The other 30 are in the village, but are still on high alert, likely waiting for the level 15's return. I can't get too close to the level 12 because there's a chance that it has will stronger than 200, so it's a bit difficult to tell what the center of the village is hiding. But this should be enough for now. Let's take the slow approach. Silas slid through the night. It was impossible to approach the village walls secretly now. Not only were there torches lighting up the night, but there were several assigned just to focus on the ground alone. Clearly, they were prepared this time. Less than mirror step greater than. The skill churned through Silas and he split into 5 versions of himself that suddenly rushed toward the wall all at once. The pig demons were taken aback, but their reactions weren't slow. They readied their crossbows and fired, but Silas dodged, his mirror images moving in sync with him. The roars filled the night air once more and a commotion broke out, but by this point, and before the pig demons could reload, Silas had already jumped to the top of the walls, him and his 5 mirror images attacking all at once. The pig demons were flustered, but what several of them didn't realize was that the mirror images couldn't harm them at all. Silas focused on his own opponent for a moment. He didn't use his kunai because while his mirror images reflected his actions, their actual position had to be controlled by him. Right now, controlling 5 of them was already his limit, but he wasn't worried. He slipped the attack of a level 8, blocked a descending blade with an elbow to its elbow, and then unleashed a second furious elbow strike right through its face. The moment Silas felt the satisfying crunch, he released his control over his mirror images and they began to act oddly. They were still mirroring his actions, but because he wasn't controlling their positions, their movements looked ridiculous as though they were throwing themselves to their death. By the time the pig demons understood that they were fighting mirages, Silas' kunai already flashed into existence, killing them. In one fell swoop, Silas killed 3 pig demons and then disappeared into the night once more, not forgetting to wipe out all the torches in the region by throwing them high and into the village. This time, he would truly torch everything. The pig demons rushed to the location on the wall, but Silas had already long disappeared. Just when they were feeling wary, thinking that they had to stay on the guard, Silas attacked much sooner than any of them expected. Chapter 233 Once. Silas swept through another region of the wall as the fires in the village began to glow furious and bright. The tents and buildings began to catch on fire, and soon a section of the militiamen had to be diverted just to deal with this outbreak alone. Since it wasn't broken, Silas had no intention of fixing it. He used the same exact tactic once more, making use of 5 of his mirages and himself to attack just 3 patrol units on the wall. This time, the reaction of the pig demons was even faster because a large number of them had already rushed to the walls. But unfortunately for them, Silas was even more relentless this time than he was the last, almost as though he was getting used to the mirror images. In fact, he found that if he focused more, rather than having them mirror his actions, he could actually change their actions by giving a portion of his mind to them. The skill broke through and entered gold mastery, allowing him to form 10 mirror images, but he never bothered to create more. Instead, he swiftly beheaded another 3 pig demons and stored them away once again. Just as he was about to vanish into the night once more, he realized that his chance had slipped away. The pig demons, if nothing else, had truly reacted with some great speed. They converged from both sides of the wall and Silas could already sense that a ballista was being aimed toward him. However, he directly ignored the latter. Even if it came firing over, he would use the pig demons as a shield. In this sort of melee battle, it was bound to be useless. Madness surged through Silas' body and a 4th weapon rushed out to join his kunai. The level 17 blade left behind by Azrael. He poured 1 ether unit into it and its strength output increased by 85%, giving it the sharpness of a blade wielded by strength approaching 300. Silas' mirror images lost their minds and began to mirror his actions like mindless clones. However, in the darkness, it was difficult to tell what they were doing exactly, so the pig demons that were rushing over ended up sending many of their crossbow bolts at them. The bolts whizzed right through and hit nothing but empty air. This took a great deal of pressure off of Silas' real body as only 1 bolt rushed toward him, which he easily picked out and dodged. Just as the pig demons got close, his kunai and the sword whizzed out in unison. 2 flashed with darkness, 1 with a fiery redness, and the last with a cool, silver hue. They pierced through the skies and a battle erupted. The pig demons fought valiantly, but unfortunately, that meant that they were too occupied to deal with Silas himself, who whizzed out like a bolt from the blue. He moved wherever his senses found opportunity, and even when his punches didn't reap lives, his blades did. Silas found himself to be in a state of unprecedented focus. In fact, he found that the range of his visualization had grown from 20 meters to almost 30. The only explanation seemed to be his breakthrough in less than maddened enlightenment greater than. He had learned to focus even in the face of death, not to waver even in the face of the greatest danger. Suddenly sensing something, Silas didn't hesitate to jump down from the city walls and vanish, not forgetting to throw several more torches into the center of the village. Smoke began to rise from the skies and Silas lurked in the dark, his green irises glowing in the night. He looked up to find that there was some daylight trying to peek out, but because of the dense clouds, it would likely take at least another 2 hours before dawn made itself known. The darkness would hang on for a while longer. By now, he had killed all of the troops on the walls and then some. Of the initial militiamen, there were just 35 or so remaining from the original 50, and many of them were occupied with fighting the flames. They were rushing in a line from their wells with heavy buckets to douse the raging inferno, but the situation was quickly getting worse. Silas didn't believe that this would last long. He had already seen the Nexus, and there were many things in it that could help a village tide over a situation like this one. So, he didn't plan on waiting until the situation got worse. He would make a move. Now. The trouble was that the village head seemed to also be reacting oddly. It didn't seem to have any intention of going to the Nexus, and had instead gathered up a group of elites. Including itself, there were 6 total. 5 level 10s and 1 level 12. Kraken, FF, level 10, physical, 152, mental, 121, will, 151. Streak, FF plus, level 12, physical, 172, mental, 181, will, 178. This time, he could see the level 12 stats clearly and he almost felt like it was too weak. The grading system of the system was far too casual. If even this was classified as an FF+, it was too much of a shame. Or in another sense, humans were far too weak. Silas couldn't help but wonder, in the outside world, would this pig demon even be an F+? A fire burnt in Silas' gut without him noticing. It was passion, a feeling that he had probably never felt for anything in his life. And yet, in the first moment he felt it, he didn't even notice because his adrenaline was pumping too hot. He wanted this victory. Silas surged into action, leaping over the unmanned city wall and heading right toward the squad of elites. Not only did he want this victory, but he wanted it swiftly. Chapter 234 Assault. Silas' actions were sharp and ruthless. He had already come to understand the layout and exact positions of the pig demons thanks to his astral will. So there wasn't the slightest hesitation in his actions. With billowing flames as his backdrop and a massive tower shield standing before him, he sent out a rain of fists. Every time he struck out, fist shadows would magically appear on the other side of the tower shield as though they had all appeared on their own. Less than madness control was in full effect. His telekinesis and physical strength layered on top of one another, forming an average strength that was less than his usual madness-boosted telekinesis at just around 170 or so, and yet far more flexible and lethal. Green fist shadows filled the skies as he emptied his ether reserves like he was firing from his hip. Without missing a beat, an ether replenishment elixir came out from his madness key and he chugged it using his telekinesis. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and Streak, the pig demon elite, and the others to his back seemed a bit slow to react. None of them seemed to expect that Silas would hop out like this, and once again, they had been caught off guard. They tried to block the green fist shadows, but the strength was beyond their imaginations. It felt like they were facing off against towering mountains, and the only one who seemed capable of blocking steadily was Streak itself. However, what they expected even less was that the moment the fists were barely dealt with, kunai would surge in from the darkness. Silas sent them flying out like arrows and, at the same time, he activated less than mirror step greater than. He let his kunai fly through predestined gaps, releasing them from his madness and then controlling his mirror images to rush out from around his shield, catching them all off guard. Several of the level 10s were so shocked by the scene that they didn't register the appearance of the kunai at all. Seeing this, Silas released his control over his mirror images, letting them flounder about just as his kunai struck home. One pig demon had their throat ripped out. The second was pierced right through the chest. The third barely managed to use its crossbow to block at the last moment, realizing that something was wrong. But that still cost it several fingers. By this point, Silas felt that his ether had already been topped up, a few seconds flashing in the blink of an eye. Now, he had 1 injured pig demon, 2 dead, and 3 more living and breathing. It was then that he summoned the Shadow Blade, and as expected, it had the exact reaction he wanted. The fear on Streak's expression was palpable. He recognized the blade immediately. But the result was still far better than anything Silas could have expected. The pig demon elite actually turned and ran, not even trying to look back. It was then that Silas used basic etherflow to pull his ether into the hovering blade. At that moment, his mirror images dispersed completely and the skies were filled with blade shadows. Fear crossed the faces of the other elites, but this only made their situation worse. Their minds were enraptured by the blade shadows, so much so that they didn't notice the kunai wrapping around their backs and reaping their lives. The last pig demons had fallen, but Silas didn't even look at him, his focus on the pig demon elite that was rushing into the distance. Silas could see that it was running not toward an exit or a gate, but the center of the village where the nexus was. Flames billowed all about and the raging storm seemed to only be getting worse with every passing second. Soon, it seemed like the entire village would be engulfed. Silas realized that he had to stop the pig demon elite. There were too many variables that could crop up. Not only could there be some sort of trump card in there, but even if there wasn't, with enough time the acting city lord could exchange for something from the nexus, or even activate some sort of protective barrier. Making a quick decision, Silas put away the tower shield and accelerated forward. He used sudden burst for the first time in a while, hitting his top speed almost instantly. Though the pig demon's physical was beyond his, speed and dexterity were clearly not its strong suits. In just a few strides, Silas was already closing the distance and the pig demon seemed to sense something. It turned back with a panicked expression and haphazardly fired a crossbow bolt. 3 shimmering bolts moved through the air swiftly, and it seemed to be a modified treasure of some sort. Even the bolts seemed to suddenly further accelerate through the air, appearing before Silas in the blink of an eye. There wasn't enough time to change their trajectories normally. Silas could only dig deep, touching upon the gluttony seed and exerting more force through his telekinesis. His will surged out like a torrent and flicked the bolts away, veering them around himself. His gut plummeted and a wave of fatigue hit him, but he focused on less than mad and enlightenment greater than, his mind hitting a state of unprecedented focus. Just as the pig demon elite was a step away from the core of the village, Silas finally felt that he was in range. His gaze flashed and he pulled back a hand. His feet skidded to a stop and his hips dropped in a powerful stance. At that moment, a pair of golden eyes appeared to his back and his momentum loomed mightily. Less than psychedelic punch greater than. A roar shot through the skies, a fist shadow wreathed in greenish gold shot through the skies just as Silas activated less than stunning spike greater than. The pig demon froze, and then its mind was assaulted by the greatest fear it had ever experienced. Chapter 235 Olden English. Silas winced slightly, but the result was still within expectations. He had even used his other arm just in case, so the damage wasn't bad. Without missing a beat, he rushed through the rest of the village, splitting off a 100 will astral will to make sure that he didn't miss anything. It was overkill considering the fact his visualization now had 30 meters of range and could envelop an entire third of the village's diameter, but he felt that it was precisely in this sort of situation that he shouldn't let his guard down. Just like this, he systematically wiped out the remainder of the pig demons. In fact, the chaos was so great that most didn't even realize what was happening until it was far too late. However, when it was finished, Silas realized that he had put himself on his own ticking timer. Without the numbers to fight the fire, things were quickly getting out of hand. Without the time to waste, he rushed to the center of the village and ripped his way into the city lord's abode. He was cautious, just in case there was a trap lying in wait. This was the one place he hadn't scouted out fully because he was worried about the pig demon elite having more than 200 will. But there was luckily nothing of the sort. The heat was getting to be overbearing, so he shielded himself in a layer of ether skin. Then, he blanketed the region and quickly found the city stele. However, he knew what kind of commotion it would cause to conquer this city, so he didn't start immediately, looking through everything else in the region to make sure that he hadn't missed anything. But in the end, the city stele was all there was. Unlike the Knoll village, there didn't seem to be anything special lying in wait. Suddenly, Silas' head snapped in a certain direction. He walked forward and then slammed a leg down. With a bang, a floorboard shattered to pieces. Silas reached down and grabbed, pulling what was down below up. All the while, his expression continued to flicker. He had actually not managed to see this before and had almost been out of luck entirely. The only reason he had was because his senses picked up the sound of breathing that was asymmetrical to his own. The moment he locked onto it, he realized there was a hollow spot in the floor. Archibald Floning, FFF. Level, 3. Profession, Master Tinker, Silver. Special talent, Scrapyard, upgradable. One man's trash is another man's treasure. This ability allows a tinkerer to find the value in cast-off items and make more with less. Taver ability, N.A. Scylla's expression flickered. This information should have been hidden. It shouldn't be possible, as far as he knew, to even see the profession of someone else, let alone see the details of said profession. The only explanation seemed to be that this man wasn't actually a part of the city at all. Now that Scylla's thought about it, ever since he came here, he had had to deal with a lot of treasures, more than usual. Every pig demon was outfitted with crossbows, then there was the ballista that had almost taken his life. Could all of this be related to this man? Pray thee, spare my life. I am of service. Scylla's was taken aback again. This man wasn't like Azrael, or maybe he was smarter than Azrael. He was speaking in the universal language of Earth, but it sounded old. It was almost like he was listening to someone from 50 years ago speak to him. This was the kind of dialect he would only hear in an advanced English lit class. Who are you? Scylla's suddenly asked. How did you end up here? I'm the engineer of this city. You aren't a pig demon, though. So how did you end up here? The man looked out of sorts. The more Scylla's looked at him, the more he felt that this man was simply too stereotypical. He had a head of sparse graying hair, he wore large framed glasses, one of the lenses of which was cracked, and he wore a dirty grey lab coat that looked like it had seen far better days. I beg your pardon, sir. I truly cannot recollect. My memories stretch back only so far as this. Who brought you here? This. I too cannot recall. Scylla's looked into the man's eyes, still holding him up by his collar, but not quite understanding what to do. An FFF profession, and especially of this sort of profession in particular, was extremely useful. In fact, it could be said that what he wanted Professor Fembrois to be able to do in the future, this man was already capable of. The issue was that this problem was too troublesome. They were on the ether plane now, where would he put this man? He couldn't return to Paradise or Lone Star without going through the Paradise portal, but how could he sneak a person into such a place? Could he put the man into the Madness Key? He certainly had enough space, but he had no idea if there was air or not in there. If there was no air, that would be fine enough. But if it was a vacuum like that of space, the man would probably die from worse things than suffocation. At least suffocation wouldn't be immediate and Scylla's would still have time to save him. What was your plan if you managed to escape detection here? Plan. The man looked more confused. I was instructed merely to conceal myself here in the event of battle, sir. Escaping was never my intention. I am far too feeble. Scylla's slowly nodded. It seemed that he wouldn't have any fate with this person. There were only two options laid out before him. Either he gives this man over to Lucius to benefit from, or he leaves the man here where he would certainly die. In the end, Scylla's had no choice but to choose the former. At least in this case, he might have a chance to reverse the situation in the future. Chapter 236 Conquer. Scylla's hauled Archibald over his shoulder, but his senses never left the man. This sort of profession was exactly the kind that was easy to underestimate. He didn't believe that Archibald truly had no method of protecting himself, and the oddity of his dialect, and appearing in this village as seemingly the only human. There were things about this that he simply could not ignore. He placed a hand on the city stele. View city status. Conquer city stele. Enter Nexus. Conquer city. Yes. At that moment, a pillar of light roared into the skies. In this region, even though it was the dead of night, it seemed as though it had become as bright as day. If the raging flames weren't eye-catching enough, this pillar was bound to be on an entirely different level. Conquer sequence triggered. Time to success, 0 hours 0 minutes and 59 seconds. Scylla's took a breath and exhaled. This was very troublesome. A minute felt short under most circumstances, but now it felt like far too much. This was the first time he was conquering a city on his own and not at the behest of someone else. Last time, he had been under the parameters of a quest, so it wasn't quite the same at all. He realized now that he wasn't actually sure what would happen once it was concluded. As far as he was aware, from the limited knowledge his grandfather had given him, conquering other cities was the best way to promote your own. So, Scylla's assumed that Kasari got all the benefits the last time. But what did it mean now that he was the one who was doing it on his own? Would it go to the Grimblades because of his affiliation? Had it always gone to the Grimblades? But the Grimblades didn't have an official city. Instead, it was separated into 3 factions led by Lucius, Malachi, and Astrid. But the potential benefits were probably the furthest thing from his mind right now. Near this village, there were 2 portals, not to mention Asriel's background being a wild card in all of this. That meant that there were at least 3 powers that could have eyes on this situation, and maybe more, depending. It might even attract beasts over here. So, as he watched the timer tick down, he felt that every slow second was another weight on his heart. However, his eyes remained sharp, and his senses primed. This gamble had almost worked out, but it could very easily go wrong if he took a wrong step. Ragnar Ravenclaw tossed and turned in his sleep, not able to calm his mind. He knew that sleep was more important to him now than it had maybe ever been. But he couldn't get today's events out of his mind. Those mammoth corpses were valuable even to him, but he had lost them just like that. He might have even been able to finally see some progress in his level. The only saving grace was that he had poisoned them. He knew that he was the only one that could absorb those gene cores without ruining his body. He hoped that that bastard died choking on his own greed. Suddenly, Ragnar's eyes snapped open and he leapt out of bed. In a step, he had already reached his door and yanked it open. On the other side, an attendant was startled. They had just been about to inform Ragnar of a few things, but it seemed that they had come too late for it to matter. Ragnar squinted and looked into the distance through a window. City is being conquered. There are no reports of a city being so nearby. Granted, we only came recently. There hasn't been time to scout out the entire region just yet. Ragnar cursed. He had just established this city and couldn't easily leave its limits. He preferred to do things on his own, but it would be difficult to get any accomplished with an official city. And it was precisely because he liked getting things done on his own that he didn't entrust someone else to be the city lord. Though, it was doubtful that any heir would do this. The question was, should he send someone? The distance was close enough. The conquering sequence had just started, and assuming the city stele was still in the village tiers, there would only be a minute to work with. In the end, Ragnar gave up on trying to benefit from the situation. But, he definitely needed to scout it out, or else being in the dark in the future would cause problems. Somehow, another power had conquered a city, something that should have taken a substantial endeavor, right under his nose. That left him feeling uneasy. Matched with what happened earlier in the day with that mysterious snakeman, it was even more important for him to be on top of things. Send out Poppy, he eventually said. Tell her not to engage unless there is an opportunity. I want information, first and foremost. Right away, sir. The system city was known as Orchulius City. At the moment, it was still quite vacant, but it had already begun showing signs of activity. Try as Lucius might, getting people to stop going into and supporting system cities was far too difficult. Just in terms of the aura it exuded, and the sense of security it projected, it was on an entirely different level. Steel walls rose up 20 meters into the sky, skyscrapers loomed tall and imposing, and there was an order and conviction to the city that simply couldn't be found in other places. Plus, most importantly of all, there was law. There were no indiscriminate killings allowed in the city. One could start up an entire life here, even be protected from beast tides and fellow humans alike. They were even safer locations than the capital cities of their so-called governments back on Earth. Deep in the core of this city, a man, too, woke up and looked toward the distance. When he saw the pillar of light, he felt a rare fluctuation in his emotional state. Chapter 237 Free. Time to success, 0 hours 0 minutes and 9 seconds. Silas watched the timer like a hawk, feeling like he was walking on a tightrope right now. Time to success, 0 hours 0 minutes and 1 second. Shoom. A rush of air and golden light spread out, and Silas felt incredibly light all of a sudden. City conquered. Do you want to displace city? Yes, no. Silas realized that he could just establish a new city right here. There were certainly penalties for displacing the city, but he didn't particularly care. He had no intention of starting up a city. He couldn't afford to be locked down to a single area right now, and even if he could, it wasn't yet time to shed pretenses with the Grimblade family. When he moved his intention toward yes, he received a pleasant surprise. Yes selected. You are not a city lord. Do you want to keep this fragmented city stele? Or would you like to sacrifice it for less than free experience? The system seemed to be calculating something, and it suddenly spit out a number. The question marks shifted and changed, being rearranged like fluttering runes until they solidified. Less than 10,000 greater than. Silas suddenly understood. This free experience, could he use it on his Vipermancer profession? That was a huge amount of experience. As far as he knew, the only missions that would allow him to collect that much was greater than modify hibernation realm into laboratory, 10,000 experience. There were no other rewards that even came close to that total. And it seemed that because it was called free experience, he could arrange them as he saw fit. Realizing this, Silas immediately chose to sacrifice the city stele. Keeping it would do him no good, and in all likelihood, if he did, he might have to hand it over to Lucius. Although he had already gained quite a bit, especially from the pig demon corpses he had yet to scavenge through, that didn't mean he liked the idea of others benefiting from his struggle. He felt a swell rush through his body, then felt a change. 10,000 free experience earned. Silas didn't wait. He immediately began to allocate the experience as he rushed out with Archibald over his shoulder. Taboo Bond. Level 4. Experience 0 10,000. Path Talent, Extricate LV4. Extricate Path Talent. Greater than Extricate less than F rank Silvergens. First, he allocated 150 experience to Taboo Bond just to check if the free experience worked as he expected. He also wanted to see if every level up really did give him the right to go after stronger genes. As expected, he could now extricate silver genes. However, he was shocked to see the leveling requirement to hit the next milestone. But in the end, he calmed down. He had yet to even see a silver gene. Even if he could upgrade to extricating gold genes, it was worthless. However, the benefits of one kind for me and were for the invincible would be more immediately useful. One kind for me. Level 5. Experience 0 1600. Path Talent, Beast Totem LV5, Insight LV5. Beast Totem, Path Talent. Greater than Suppress less than F rank Serpents Beasts by less than 60% greater than. Greater than Forms Hibernation Realm where recovery increases by less than 1600% greater than. Greater than Increase Fusion Speed by less than 500% greater than. Greater than Buff Contracts by less than 100% greater than. Insight Path Talent. Greater than Observe Gene Sequence of Contract. Greater than Sense Evolution Triggers. Greater than Comprehend Contract. Were for the invincible. Level 5. Experience 0 1600. Path Talent, Fuse LV5. Fuse Path Talent. Greater than Fuse with your contract and gain less than 100% of their stats. Greater than Fuse with less than one contract at a time. Greater than Fusion process takes less than 1 minutato complete. Greater than Fusion lasts less than 240 seconds greater than. Silas' gaze flashed when he saw this. It seemed that the immediate benefits truly were more. He had only spent 890 experience and had gained so much. So, he spent another 3,200. One kind for me. Level 6. Experience 0 3200. Path Talent, Beast Totem LV6, Insight LV6. Beast Totem, Path Talent. Greater than Suppress less than F rank Serpents Beasts by less than 70% greater than. Greater than Forms Hibernation Realm where recovery increases by less than 3200% greater than. Greater than Increase Fusion Speed by less than 600% greater than. Greater than Buff Contracts by less than 120% greater than. Insight Path Talent. Were for the invincible. Level 6. Experience 0 3200. Path Talent, Fuse LV6. Fuse Path Talent. Greater than Fuse with less than one contract at a time. Greater than Fusion process takes less than 30 seconds to complete. Greater than Fusion lasts less than 8 minutes greater than. Now, with the synergy of these two talents, he could finish fusing with the Basilisk King in just 5 seconds. Now, he only had 5,910 free experience left. It wasn't enough to buff both of them, but only one. If he chose were for the invincible, he would likely increase the fusion period to 16 minutes and cut down the fusion speed to as low as 2 to 3 seconds. Wait, looking at this screen, there's something I didn't consider. Were for the invincible and one kind for me are two paths that I picked specifically for their synergy. Until now, I've only used the synergy to speed up the fusion. But looking at the Beast Totem's ability, when I fuse with the Basilisk King, could it be that I could use it to buff myself? The fusion ability came from his Were ability, and the Beast Totem came from his One Kind for Me ability. In the past, he chose them purely for synergy, believing that they could build off one another, and he had been satisfied with the results until now. But had he been too conservative with his thoughts? In the end, Silas chose to buff One Kind for Me one more time for two reasons. First, the backlash on his body the last time he fused made him realize that he couldn't do it lightly. In addition, whenever he was heavily injured, it didn't work and became a useless ability. Second, his next target was going to be the Arctic Cobras, where having his Beast Totem would be endlessly useful. In addition, in case he was right about his Beast Totem working on himself after a successful fusion, then the benefits of a 140% buff would be off the charts for him, especially if it occurred on top of the boost to his stats given through the fusion itself. The moment Silas made the decision, his visualization picked up on something that made him come to a grinding halt. Ignoring Archibald's protests, he ducked and rolled, his reaction speed much faster now that his visualization range had hit 30 meters. Bang! The ground he had just been standing on exploded. Chapter 238 Burning. Silas' gaze flashed with a cold light. It seemed that whenever he got into trouble, it came in endless waves. However, every time it happened, he seemed to become more and more used to it. His body, which had begun to cool down after the battle, suddenly began to heat up once again. As he rolled, he left Archibald behind a tree, and the direction of the arrow had already been retraced through his mind. In an instant, he had already pulled out a ballista bolt. By the time he had popped back up to his feet, the bolt had appeared at the edge of his visualization range, and he launched it at full speed. The archer didn't expect that an attack would suddenly appear dozens of meters from Silas' location. They were so focused on Silas himself that they weren't prepared. Still, they were incredibly skilled and reacted quickly. In fact, the moment they sent out the arrow, they had already begun to move. And, because of the delay, they had already made it a decent distance away. But Silas hadn't expected to actually hit them. He just wanted them to know that he wasn't an easy target. Sometimes, deterrence was the best sort of defense. Psychological warfare was no less important than real combat. Silas leaned to the side and grabbed out, pulling the back of Archibald's lab coat and hauling him over a shoulder again. In just a few blinks, he had already curved around several trees and continued to accelerate. He checked his body state to see if he could use fusion now, but realized quickly that he was still injured. However, he had a vague understanding that he was actually quite close to being able to take this next step. The upgrades to my paths should have also subtly made it easier to fuse while also being injured. Carry this, Silas said coldly. Before Archibald could react, the hero's heart tower shield appeared in his hands. The engineer lurched forward but still managed to hold on. Whether he had levels or not, he was still a grown man. Holding up 50 pounds was difficult, but if it meant protecting his life, he could still do it. If you don't want to die, keep holding it up. Having been hauled over Silas' shoulder, Archibald's position was awkward to say the least. He could only rely on his shoulders and biceps to hold the tower shield up, and with the speed Silas was moving at, the jostling around was making 50 pounds feel a lot more like double that. The only support Silas could give him was making sure he didn't have to worry about falling off, but other than that, there was nothing else they could do. At that moment, another arrow came. Silas didn't miss a beat, activating basic etherflow. The shield slammed downward and was almost ripped out of the engineer's control. But the rebound against the ground was quick and sharp, even lessening the burden on him for a small second. Bang! A shockwave rippled out, and a spherical shield appeared around them. The arrow coming from the distance deflected, being sent spiraling into the distance. Silas caught it with his telekinesis and sent it flying back from where it came just as fast. He didn't stop his steps even a single time, his pace increasing. His control over his body had reached an unprecedented level, but running with someone on his back had thrown his balance off and plummeted his efficiency. Unless he was willing to use less than madness control. No, it wasn't easy to counter that loss in efficiency, so at best, he could output around 90 speed or so. But the more he got used to it, the more he accelerated, and the faster his pace became. Soon, he had surpassed 100 speed, and then 110. He ended up reaching a cap at 120 despite the fact his real speed was 140, but he didn't seem to mind it at all. Not only was he injured, but he was now carrying over 200 pounds on his shoulder. To be able to hit this pace at all was a testament to his constitution and strength. At the same time, he strained his senses, paying attention to every little ripple in the surroundings. Suddenly, he felt a spike of danger. However, there was nothing detected in his visualization. Even so, he responded to his instinct, knowing that it had to come from his luck. The shield slammed into the ground again, rippling outward. The moment the ripple of energy hit the energy shield, it appeared in Scylla's visualization, but that was also the exact same moment he noticed it break through. It exceeded 400 points of damage. Scylla's expression flickered. Just who was chasing after him like this? He could feel his lungs screaming, his heart rate increasing. Veins bulged across his body, and he dug deep. There was nowhere to dodge. A roar came from Scylla's mouth, something that he truly never expected from himself. He rolled his shoulder forward and twisted his hips. In that instant of time, Archibald's body twisted as well, and the shield in his arms spun. Scylla used his telekinesis to lessen the load on the engineer's joints and shoulders, pulling the shield right into the path of the coming arrow. Bang! Archibald screamed, and Scylla shook, his forward momentum having taken a hit due to his sudden movement and the impact of the arrow. Scylla took a step back, and the soil beneath his feet sunk. His green irises flashed in the night, but he felt something boiling inside of him. It was beyond adrenaline, beyond fear. For a moment, he seemed to strip away the mask that covered his face, and his will blazed. Title upgraded, a flexible will, a burning will. Your will is truly one of a kind. While immature and still growing, it burns with a furious intent. Continue to forge it, young man. +20 will. Chapter 239 Passion. Green flames seemed to erupt within Scylla's eyes and he suddenly punched out with his free arm. A fist of burning intent thrummed through the world and shot into the distance. A second fist appeared, then a third. They layered atop one another and then accelerated as they grew in size. At the same time, an arrow that had spiraled into the distance was grasped by Scylla and he sent it erupting forward. With the increase to his will, his telekinesis was capable of displaying 221 points of strength. But now, with basic etherflow, he could display the might of a fragmented F-skill, boosting it by another 10%. At the same time, his fists carried 140 points of strength. With a 10% boost, they were at 154. But when layered 3 times over one another under the control of Scylla's mind being pushed to their absolute limits, they broke through their limits again. While it should have displayed 462 points of strength, there was some loss, resulting in a power that was just under 400 and a speed that was just as exaggerated. Scylla's telekinesis seemed to have reached a new level entirely. The archer in the distance felt their heart shake. Fist soared forward, and an arrow hidden in the shadows snuck in behind it. Scylla didn't wait to find out what happened. He used his plant foot, pushing against the ground hard. In one swift motion, he adjusted Archibald's position on his shoulder again and shot off into the distance, not paying mind to anything else. He diverted some of his telekinesis to lighten the load on his shoulder and accelerated further, hitting his true 140 speed. Soon, he had vanished into the darkness. A groan echoed as an archer grabbed onto her thigh. In it, an arrow had gone almost all the way through. But the damage around her was what was truly shocking. She leaned against a high tree, but there was a deep crater cut into one. A crater that looked exactly like the fist of a giant had smashed right into it. Ironically, if not for this crater, she would have already fallen out of this tree. It was thanks to it that she had space to lean back. But it was also thanks to it that she had been pierced through the leg by her own arrow. She hadn't thought that Scylla would be able to not only send out such an attack across 40 meters of distance, but even sneak a second attack in behind it. What was even more ridiculous was that she had been harmed by her own arrow. If others learned of this, she would truly be a laughing stock. Just what kind of ability was that? Telekinesis. She had heard of it before in passing, but she had never seen telekinesis that was so powerful. Fuck. Scylla's Grimblade, Her gaze flashed with murder. She felt like it was too much of a joke. How could someone not on the rankings have such power? The worst part was that even with her advanced scouting ability, she could only see his name and nothing else. But knowing that it was a Grimblade was all she needed. It seemed that their Ravenclaw family wasn't the only one in this region. Silas was surprised to find that he wasn't attacked again. Had his attack worked out better than he thought? Unfortunately, the archer was outside the range of his visualization, so he hadn't been sure. But even if she had been, he wouldn't have stuck around. He felt like that archer was the least of his worries. If things really went south, and Asriel was from a system city like he speculated, then he might be sieged much worse if he lagged behind any longer. As far as Silas knew, system cities should have far more restrictions. But since they had managed to send someone out to conquer a city, that meant that their restrictions weren't nearly as great as he thought they were, or at the very least, they could ignore them for a price. He remembered that Asriel's genes were inaccessible to him. Maybe that was related to the price that had been paid. Yet, he was so powerful nonetheless, and that couldn't help but leave Silas feeling solemn. Dozens of minutes later, Silas saw Lucia's city in the distance and he was suddenly hit by a wave of fatigue. He felt that his body was about to collapse. It was only now he realized just how much his will was holding him up. He also realized something very important as well. He wasn't eating nearly enough. By now, the last time he had eaten was already almost 24 hours ago. Although he had eaten a lot, if he wanted to support his body, he couldn't do this. Halt! A sound came from an outpost, but Silas wasn't surprised. If Lucius just let him stroll in with a random unknown person, then he would be too incompetent. Soon, though, Silas had checked in and Lucius was informed about the existence of Archibald. As for Silas, he chose to leave. He wanted to shower and to also eat, then rest. He would set out again tomorrow, going for the home of the Arctic King Cobra. Even if he had to break his body into pieces every day, that would be what he had to do. He felt like there was a guillotine hanging over his head, and he couldn't stand to waste even a single time. But for the first time in his life, he felt true excitement. Once he shed fear and started to take control of his life again, he found something hidden deeper within. Passion. This was what he had been looking for his entire life. No amount of hours in the lab, academic research, or flowery accolades could match up to this. So even with his body beaten and broken, he suddenly wanted to go out and do it all over again. It was as he was furiously eating that something he expected came. Lucius entered his dining hall with a shining light in his eyes. Chapter 240 Reward. Lucius sat across from Silas, not interrupting his eating. He didn't say anything immediately, but neither did Silas. It wasn't that Silas was so antisocial, it was more so they both knew that it was a bit rude of Lucius to come and interrupt Silas when he was trying to recover. But it was also clear that Lucius had done this more so out of appreciation for Silas than anything else. He simply sat there and sipped at what looked like water, and Silas inhaled food as though he hadn't eaten in weeks. Soon, Silas had finished off the last of his food and looked up. The gazes of the two men met, and there seemed to be a clash of sorts. But this was too crude of an explanation. There was a fire in Silas' chest that had yet to wane, and because of that, it was hard for Silas to restrain his usual thoughts. So at the moment, every thought seemed to be reflected into the air, his charisma, not to mention his voice of a King Gene talent, painting a visual that took Lucius aback. However, Lucius didn't seem to be weak either. He met Silas' gaze and watched as the green flames in his eyes slowly extinguished. Inwardly, Lucius couldn't help but shake his head. He had meant every word he said back then. Free wills like Silas were too difficult to control. Rather than leaving such variables lying around, it was better to just directly kill them. He couldn't see things the same way Astrid or Malachi did. However, there was no denying how useful Silas was to him. Not only had he brought back the disc he thought had become a lost cause, but now he had brought back Archibald and information about an encampment of another powerful family. In terms of impact, Silas had proved himself more useful than his first pick. Though, it would take time for Nathan to display his usefulness. The disc was a huge boon. Though it was damaged, it would help them to secure the region around Paradise and truly make it their own. This would make it far easier to advance and retreat. When portals grew too large, there would also be more area to cover and protect. It would also make it far easier for others to sneak into this region and learn the location of their city. But now, once the disk had been refined and fixed, they would have perfect control over this. Of course, this wouldn't last forever. The disk was just a temporary measure and it couldn't stop the ether plane from fusing with Earth. But it would still buy them several months of time, and a lot could be done. Then there was Archibald. An upgradable profession was incredibly rare, but what was far more curious were Archibald's origins. These sorts of secrets were enough to move those in the shadows of the Grimblade family, and if Lucius reported this matter, then he would gain a huge advantage over Malachi and Astrid even if he didn't get to keep Archibald himself. It could be said that after lagging behind, this one move by Silas had helped him to pull ahead of his two cousins. Soon, that would be reflected in both resources and his level. That left Lucius in a dilemma. On the one hand, Silas was simply far too useful. On the other, he was too useful. You've done me a great service this time, Silas. I did not reward you nearly enough for your first helping hand, and before I could get such a chance, you handed me yet another gift. This time, I can't make the same mistake as the first time. I am willing to give you any skill you desire up to the franc. I can also grant you 10,000 coins and a chance to use our city's nexus. If there's anything else you need, feel free to let me know now. Silas' gaze flashed, and after a moment of thought, he spoke. For the FF skill, I would like the highest upgraded form of less than basic scouting greater than. And instead of the 10,000 coins and access to the Nexus, I need a method of transportation that's more convenient. Maybe a mount of some sort, preferably of the Serpentis lineage, but I would take anything with decent speed and strong stamina. Lucius' brows raised. The Serpentis, why is that? Silas knew that this might give Lucius more information than he wanted to give, but he also didn't mind it too much. This gave him a chance. He wanted to see the depths Lucius had. Would he really be capable of this? And if he was capable of it, what did that say about what the Grimblade family was capable of? The mount was only really a secondary ask, he didn't care about it much. Not having one wouldn't be an issue because it would just give him a chance to strengthen his own stamina. What he really wanted was the scouting skill. He had run out of money to trade for a good one before because his priorities were elsewhere. But now that he had an opportunity to shore up that weakness, he would take it. I should be able to do both, but a snake mount is too rare. It will likely have to be a normal F mount unfortunately. Lucius was very candid and didn't hide anything. Tell you what, I will give you both the mount and a method of holding them. Hopefully, that will make up for this folly. As for your skill, you can come and pick it up tomorrow. Lucius gave Silas a nod and then stood. Soon, he had disappeared. Silas watched him leave. The calmer Lucius was, the less time he felt like he had. As expected, the next moment, he gained exactly what he wanted. Master Scouting, FFF, skill. Basic of Beast Holding, F treasure. Taking these two items, Silas left the city once more under the guise of continuing his scouting mission.